Hello once again. I'm chemist John Morris Pendleton, and we're now in our fifth conference, and this is one of the really exciting ones because I know it's a question that lots of people have. What is the age of the earth? When did the creation actually occur? And of course, we're going to go to the Bible. Now, by comparison, looking at two timelines, one of what the Bible says, one of what evolutionists say, we have the creation of everything happened about 6,000 years ago. About 4,400 years ago, the worldwide flood occurred, of which 8 people were saved. Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary 2,000 years ago, and we expect that maybe in the next 5 minutes that he could come back again to rule the earth. Are you ready? He could come back. He is coming back, and it could be soon. Now, according to the Big Bang Theory and evolution, it was about 20 billion years ago. There was a big bang, a big explosion. Millions and millions of years went by. 4.6 billion years ago, the earth was formed. From where they don't know, it collected water, began raining on the earth, and 3 billion years ago, the first life forms appeared, which survived, had something to eat, and were interested and able to reproduce themselves into all the forms we have today. Now, where do we get the idea from the Bible that the creation of everything happened 6,000 years ago? In the Bible, beginning with chapter 5 of Genesis, we have genealogies. And we start with Adam, and it gives the age of the father when a key son was born in the line that eventually reached to Jesus Christ. And so we begin adding up these ages, and we come up that the flood occurred 1,656 years after the creation. After the flood, we continue to count genealogies. We have the age of the father when their son was born. Then we have time of captivity in Egypt, then coming out, wandering in the wilderness, the different years for judges and kings ruling over Israel, other ages of captivities. And we come all the way down to the final book of the Old Testament, the book of Malachi, where from history we add between 300 to 400 years to when Christ was born. That's a total of about 4,000 years. From Christ to today is 2,000. 4 plus 2 is 6,000 years. Now let me give you a little suggestion. When God reveals a truth in His Word, He reveals it many, many times from different angles in different ways to confirm the truth of it. And so in the case of when the creation occurred, we also have from the book of Luke angle that goes back the other direction. Because in Luke 3 we have the genealogy through Joseph all the way back from Jesus until Adam. Of course, Joseph was Jesus' political father, but still we have the genealogy in that direction. It turns out to be 75 generations. Now, I propose that we take an average of about 50 years for every generation between father and when this son was born. Now, I realize that sometimes it was more time than that, sometimes it was less time than that, but we just want to get an idea. So if we take 75 generations, multiply it by 50 years for each generation, we get 3,750 years, very close to our total of some 4,000 years from the creation until Christ was born. And so it confirms that attitude. Now, from the evolutionary standpoint, their clock is called the geological time scale. Now, as you look at this list, don't say, my, what unusual names. At least you know this one at 190 million years, which is the Jurassic period. All of you know about Jurassic Park. Actually, there's 3 periods here I want to mention for later reference. It's the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous rocks or periods. Now, the idea is this. These numbers here represent millions of years in the evolutionary time scale. And the idea is that the oldest rocks are furthest in the earth. On top of them are younger rocks. On top of them are younger rocks. And so goes the sequence. Now, we asked the evolutionist, where can we go in the world to see exactly, in sight, these layers of rocks exactly as you've laid out there? We're thinking, where could we go? Oh, I know. We could go to the Grand Canyon in Arizona. That hole is almost a mile deep. We have all kinds of layers of rock. Guess what? About 50% of them are missing. Also, as you can see in this next transparency, from Canada into the United States, all this red area is called Precambrian rock. This is rock that's even older than 600 million years. And the younger rock is underneath it. In other words, the whole thing is turned upside down. Actually, there's only one place in the world that you can go to consistently find, consistently see these layers of rock is laid out. You know where it's at? In the books. I told you, they're good at making fascinating drawings of things that don't exist. That is not science. Now, you've probably heard the little fairy tale about with a magic wand, you just touch the toad and it turns into a prince. Well, evolution is even more fantastic. They say this, that over millions of years ago, there were worms living at the bottom of the oceans and the seas. But through millions of years and some favorable accidents, some of them changed into fish. More favorable accidents and more millions and millions of years, some of them changed into amphibians, as a frog. With more favorable accidents and millions of years, some of them changed into primates, then into chimpanzee, and finally into our professor of biology. Now, for evolution, millions of years is indispensable for by chance happenings that this evolutionary process can take place. Obviously, if I had a worm here and say that at the end of my talk this would be a professor of biology, you say you're making fun of the biologist. But if I say over a period of millions and millions of years the worm became a professor of biology, you say, oh, that's quite believable. Anyway, let's take a look at some clocks. One of the first clocks that we have is the delta at the end of the great river Mississippi by New Orleans that empties out into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, those in search of oil have drilled both in the Gulf of Mexico as well as into the continental USA, which means into that landmass which comprises the delta. Now, they observe what is deposited dirt, what is virgin dirt, as they drill down into the ground. And so from that we can know how extensive was the delta, how deep it was, how much dirt is deposited there. Also, we can measure how much water is flowing and sediments bringing. I read one figure that some 30,000 tons of dirt are brought down every hour. And so with those things put together, we find that the whole delta, this is what a delta looks like. It's when a river flows into a larger body of water. The water slows and the sediments it carries begin to accumulate, forming that landmass called a delta. This whole Mississippi River delta could have been formed in 6,000 to 10,000 years. Now, mind you, they don't take into consideration that there had been a worldwide flood, after the which maybe half of that delta Earth had come down in the first 100 years or so. It indicates a young Earth. What is the oldest living thing on Earth today? Please, no family jokes or things of that nature. The oldest living thing is called the bristlecone pine. It's also called the Methuselah pine. It is about 4,300 years old. Whoa, what happened 4,300 years ago? Well, according to the Bible, there was a worldwide flood that completely revamped all the real estate. Plants, animals, and people began to populate the earth about 4,400 years ago. Interesting. How come we don't have anything living older than 4,300 years, older than the time of the flood? Also, we have the giant sequoia trees of California. Here's a picture of one that's over 300 feet tall, some 21 feet wide at its base. Plenty of room to cut a hole and fit a car in there. And they're about 4,000 years old. Now, what's the reason that the bristlecone pine and the sequoia trees are so old? Two reasons. One is their resistance to plant diseases, as well as their resistance to forest fires. Indicates a young Earth. Another clock that indicates a young Earth is the world's population. A few years ago, we passed above 6 billion people in the world. We want to make a calculation backwards to find out how much time will it take to have 6 billion people alive on the Earth. Again, I propose an average number of 150 years to duplicate the living population on the earth. Again, I realize there's times it takes more time than that, times it's taken less time than that, but to get an idea. So we start out with 6 billion people, count back 150 years, and take half of